Hello everybody, welcome to another Innovation Series demo. Today I wanted to showcase a capability that's near and dear to my heart, which is really AI-powered APIs. And this is all an exploration, so we are going to be basically talking about some stuff that's a proof of concept, some stuff that's hypothetical, and unfortunately, unlike some of the other exploration demos we did, these are not something that you can just kind of recreate on your own or kind of hack around or build around. So unfortunately, there are some fundamental platform gaps here that I'll kind of showcase a vision on. And it is something that, we're definitely very interested in exploring on how to productize. So generally this pattern would look something like this, where you're developing a client application. And this can be a traditional looking, feeling client application. It doesn't have to be AI enabled or powered or anything. And the major difference is that unlike traditionally where you have to go kind of find the right API endpoints, understand their structures, understand the data models, here you basically just prompt an AI API to go do the work for you. And there's an AI model behind it that basically goes and orchestrates and uses the right APIs, or in my case, in my demo today, server functions to accomplish your use case and give you the result you want. And today, Poly actually keeps a conversation history that has a detailed account of which function did the AI select, what arguments did it pass it, what result did it get, and then what did it generate based off that result. But what's missing is that today, this process is very slow, and you'll see that in the demo today. And then also, it would get very expensive at high volume. So it'd be very slow and very expensive, but it's very powerful. So the vision here is to then basically to use that conversation history knowledge, kind of like as the AI demonstration of what it did, the account of what it did, and to kind of turn that into a generated equivalent client function that accomplishes the same result. And if we can pull that off, then you could potentially use this AI-powered prompt to basically just get to what you want during development, and then it would generate you a function that does the same equivalent thing without needing to go through an AI model and engage an AI in that runtime flow. And then there's also a little bit more fuzziness around kind of how that client function would regenerate. So for example, if the prompt were to change, you would want to regenerate that client function. But likewise, if the underlying APIs or server functions were to change, it would be nice if you could dynamically regenerate that client function and not incur any breaking change in your client. So then that could potentially keep you up to date, but even without that capability, there's still a tremendous amount of value. So really the value here is that you can do prompt-based client development. So no more portals, documents, consoles, Postman, or anything. You just prompt what you want, and if you're happy with the result, you use the generated equivalent function. And the major innovation so far today has been the ability to kind of generate these AI models and give you an API that feeds into them, like an ingress API. And then also the way that they're associated with and packaged with our server functions. So these two kind of innovations give you a really powerful use case already, and I'll show that today. And obviously the conversation history, maintaining that account of what's happened. But the vision, like I said, is really to generate automatically and deploy client functions that you can use. And then maybe even one step further, keep them up to date dynamically using AI to avoid any breaking changes or to potentially just stay up to date with the latest API changes. So that's even maybe a further vision. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into a demo of how this client was developed. I'll showcase what's available today. Then I'll show you that conversation history that we'd like to mine to then be able to potentially leverage AI to generate the equivalent client functions. So let's dive into the client code first. So here we're looking at the backend for my client application. this is really the layer that's interfacing with the AI. My app.ts is really just the front-end generator. So think of the app.ts as just a conventional UI, and then the server.js as my backend. So what makes this so powerful is that my server exposes to my client UI an endpoint that it can invoke. And then in here, I use this AI model. And I'll show you in Postman how this was generated. For now, just conceptualize it as a set of server functions bundled together into a model. And so here, I'm basically using a generic poly API function to access my particular model, which is built on top of Kroger's public APIs. And then a specific instance URL that I'm using where my tenant is hosted. I'm maintaining a session so I can have a unique conversation per user or per client, depending on your use case. And then down here, I have I'm injecting my poly API key to access this endpoint. And really, kind of the interesting part is this, few lines right here, where I'm basically telling this API endpoint, search for stores using the zip code, give me a response that looks like this, and I specify the object model I want. And my front end actually relies on it being exactly this object model. And then I say, just give me the JSON and nothing else. And then for the products endpoint, you'll notice I use exactly the same API. So it's kind of one multi-purpose API. The difference is I ask it for products with specific names at specific stores, and then I say, and I want them like this. So really powerful if you think about it. As a front-end developer or a client developer, I might just end up at some point in the near future having to write statements like this instead of having to go use APIs. And that's the vision behind this kind of major innovation breakthrough here. So let's go take a look at what this UI looks like and get a feel for how this manifests. So the UI is nothing fancy. I can type in a zip code here. I'll go ahead and search for stores in my location in Erie. And you'll notice this is how slow it is, right? Now, this might be acceptable for some people in terms of performance. If it's an internal app or something like that, it might be fine. We'll go ahead and search for milk here. And oops, I didn't select the store. Let's go ahead and select one. And again, it's, in my opinion, really slow, but it might be acceptable for some use cases. And this is totally possible today. And then the other kind of challenge is that all this content is generated. So if it's high volume, it might get very expensive. So summary, if it's low volume and this latency is tolerable, feel free to use it today. However, if you need higher volumes or faster performance, that's what I want to talk about next. But before we do that, I'd like to just show you how this plugin model was generated and then that conversation history for it as well. So here's an example of that plugin model. It's, maybe 15 lines of JSON where you specify a name. And by the way, this is a demo I built. This is not the official Kroger plugin, so please don't get confused. This is a demo I built. And so here I just used Kroger's APIs to build a Kroger-like ChatGPT experience. So here's where you specify the function IDs you want to be part of it. So you can think of this as associating it to a controlled set of microservices you built or API functions you want to expose to this AI model. The other thing to consider here is that we generate both a plugin URL, which you can use within OpenAI, as well as a plugin API URL, which you can use to access through an API. And so that demo I showed you is using this plugin API URL. This is the actual endpoint that those requests are going to. And then this model, leveraging OpenAI, picks amongst these functions to accomplish that user's prompt, and then basically go and execute those API calls, in this case server functions, which then in turn use Kroger's APIs, and then transform that data to the model that the user wanted, and then give it back to them. And the conversation history looks like this, where you could see that we maintain each message that's happened in the conversation history with a unique ID, internal system ID. And here you could see that this is what my client prompted it. It's in stringified JSON. Then you could see that the AI assistant used the store search function with the following arguments. And then you could see that this was the data that was actually given back to the AI agent. It looked like this. And then lastly, we can see that the AI agent then basically took it and generated this response, which was just straight JSON in our case. Same idea with the product search. You can see that happened next. Then we basically called a search products AI function, different result set, different generated JSON. So the missing capability here is, how do you go from this kind of logged information that showcased step by step what happened into something like a custom unique generated client function for a particular call, right? And I'd like to show you what that function could look like roughly what it should generate. But like I said, there's a big gap in the middle of how do you go from this to that function, and that's unsolved completely at this point, and it's quite a complicated problem that I don't think people are going to be able to solve. So let's go take a look at ideally what would happen next if the user was happy with the results with the AI's generation. Ideally next, the AI would generate a function like this and deploy it to Poly. And that'd be great, because then the client developer could just use that function to accomplish it. So I'll go ahead and mimic that here by deploying this function to the Poly server and showing you what it would look like to then include it in that backend for the client. I'm going to go do that offline in the interest of time, and I'll be back with the finished result. So I basically went ahead and just deployed this function to the Poly server using this command up here, and then you could see that it was actually added to generated client functions, get stores, and that's the kind of hypothetical function that I generated manually today that in the future might be kind of auto-generated for you. So now let's go ahead and see what the client developer would have to do once this function has been generated to apply it in their code. So basically what would happen is this whole section of code would be eliminated, and all the client developer would have to do is basically just return the results of that newly generated client function. So it would be something like this. And let's just double check. Yep. And it would basically then be wait poly dot Kroger dot test app generate client function, and here we have to specify a zip code. I believe it's the zip code. 1 second, sorry. Oh, sorry, that's the context, that's not the function. It would be get stores, and then in here you'd specify the zip code, which would be my zip code that I got passed in. And with that, let's go ahead and restart the server. I'll go ahead and clear this so the results are easier to see. And we'll just do okay. And now let's go take a look at the experience now that we're totally bypassing the AI. Okay, so here we are. Let's go ahead and type in our zip code. And we can see drastically faster performance. And again, cost is going to be a massive difference too. So that's the vision. I hope this made sense. I do really believe that if this is productized in an elegant way, you could end up in a situation where, as a developer, you don't even bother to learn the APIs at all. You just work with this AI endpoint to kind of prototype it, massage it into what you want, and then you run a command to give you a function that wraps whatever the AI did and just does it for you. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting, and have a great rest of your day.